So, good day, everyone. Welcome to our conversations in planetary health. I'm Renzo Guinto, Associate Professor of Global and Planetary Health at the SingHealth Duke-NUS Global Health Institute here at the Duke-NUS Medical School, National University of Singapore. And this conversation series that we are having is an opportunity for us to really unpack some of the major challenges that we're facing at the nexus of the health of both people and the planet, as well as the solutions. What do we need, to do in order to safeguard our health and to safeguard the health of, the environment, our ecosystems. As we know, we are facing a lot of problems, in this day and age: climate change, pollution to the air, water, and land, loss of biodiversity, and therefore there is an urgent need for transformative action from all sectors, from all disciplines, and that's why again we're having these conversations. And in this series, we are bringing different perspectives, and so today we'll be hearing perhaps a unique perspective, and hopefully we'll be able to co-incubate potential solutions, responses again to these many existential threats, challenges of our time. And in SDGHI, that's the acronym of our institute, we are building our planetary health program in order to really mobilize expertise, resources, again to tackle these issues through research, education, and direct influence in the arenas of policy and practice. And so, today, as you have noted, we're going to explore this idea of transformative leadership for planetary health. We're very grateful that we have a well-sized group here in Duke-NUS, but we also have participants joining us online. And so, today what we're going to do is we'll start with a conversation with our guest, followed by an open forum when you can ask, questions, also share your thoughts and comments on the many things that we will be covering this afternoon. So today I'll introduce to you, our speaker, our guest, and I'm not going to give a Wikipedia type or style
Just
of
one sentence is fine.
introduction. He's a good friend for many years, although interestingly, we've only met once in person.
Yes.
We are both alumni of Harvard University, so we got to meet when we were in Boston. He is the founding president of the Center for Asia Leadership, based in Malaysia. Later on, we'll hear more about what they're doing. I believe you're finishing also your PhD. So he's doing so many things, and he's really, remember in my Facebook and LinkedIn post, I said there, Asia's leadership guru, right? Because he's been teaching, training, and empowering young Asians to become leaders. Especially as, again, I alluded to a while ago, we are facing so many complex challenges that require leadership. And that's what we're going to explore this afternoon. So welcome, Samuel Kim, to Duke-NUS. Let's give him a big round.
Thank you very much.
So I said I will skip the Wikipedia formal, web page kind of introduction, LinkedIn introduction. But I'll give you a chance to share a bit about, your journey, very briefly. Who are you?
Sure.
What have you been doing? And especially we have lots of young people in this room. So and young people from the health sector. So what can help young health professionals learn from someone like you who's in the area of leadership development.
Well, Renzo, thank you very much. And I want to also, welcome every one of you. And also, thank you so much for making your time to be present in this talk. I began to really think about leadership when I was 10 and I moved to Philippines. And then afterwards, I traveled to, different places in Asia. And I've been always kind of thinking about why do certain countries or companies or organizations or communities, some of them, they grow, but some of them are stuck. Some of them are in the state of decline. And I've been always kind of wondering about this. The country I come from, Korea, used to be one of the poorest countries in the world in the 50s and 60s, 70s, all possibly through mid 80s. And I have kind of witnessed a part of that journey of really, our priority was to cut poverty, right? And then having people eat 3 meals a day. I've grown, hearing that my parents used to eat 1 to 2 meals a day when they were young. And I've heard a lot of these stories. So I've been always kind of looking at it from that perspective. And I think throughout my professional career, my first work was at the United Nations. And that got me also exposed to many challenges around the world. We call that transnational challenge. And I felt that, where we are today, what we are today is an outcome of what we have been doing all this while, right? So if we really want to improve today and moving forward, the path moving forward, we have to do something that will bring a brighter future, right? It doesn't come, free to you, right? So there's always something that you have to do that will result in the better or worse, or maybe, what we call the stuckness, right? The mediocrity. So been trying to look at it from that perspective. And I felt that, yeah, I think leadership is extremely important in this act of improving things. And so I think the United Nations, that exposure, that was 9/11, and also I think in 2002, I was witnessing literally about 45 wars happening, and I remember that was in my early 20s. I had a very difficult time going back home because there were just so many things happening. Now, one thing I noticed was that it's the human arrogance, in ignorance, that cause these challenges, that brings these challenges, right? It's really a human-made challenges because of the human arrogance and ignorance. But also it's the human arrogance and ignorance that make it very difficult for humans to solve the problems. Witness that. So leadership is really about, how do we manage our ignorance and the arrogance that we have, and the fact that we, what we do does not result in bringing improvement to the reality that we are in. And so my youth of witnessing some countries, I'm not sure if you know, Myanmar used to be one of the very well-to-do countries back in the 30s and 40s. You might have heard about this. The World Economic Forum, there's a report that back in the days, the international companies used to hire people from university and gone because they used to be top 5 university in Asia. You've witnessed what Cambodia is. Cambodia, Phnom Penh used to be the Paris of China, or many other countries. So at one point you may be up there, but at one point you may be down there. At one point you're just stuck. There's always a reason for that. And how do we improve things? That's where the leadership comes into play. And so I felt that. And I've been, and before kind of joining and creating the Center for Asian Leadership was the 2008 financial crisis. The 158-year-old company I was part of collapsed because of the financial crisis. And they're the main culprit for bringing the financial crisis. And again, 50% of the people who ended up in jail had degrees from Harvard, and many of them actually had degrees from Ivy League, and of course, best schools around the world. Despite all the intellectual capabilities, why have 2008 financial crisis? Why have they, in a way, brought that to our world? Right? There were a lot of warning signs, yet we ignored them. Either again because of our ignorance or arrogance, we ended up, having, 2008 financial crisis, having so much negative impact. And I think that was really my turning point, for me to kind of think about, hey, I think the life has to be much more meaningful, and I felt that maybe I should really, look into leadership and how I could promote, good leadership across the board, from government to international organizations to companies. And so that's what I've been doing over the past 10 years. I think next year will be my 10th year. But yeah, I'm really grateful for the privilege given to go to different places, in Asia and beyond, to engage in this sort of work. Maybe I can stop there. And
Sure.
then, yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Samuel. And what I'm hearing from you is the leadership journey begins at a young age, right? When we witness all of these changes happening around us, our eyes become open to the realities. And then you mentioned at least two crises: 9/11, and then the financial crisis of 2008. We're now in 2024, in a few months, or
Yes,
2025.
yes.
Our generation, I'm saying our generation, right? The young generation have seen at least, several crises in the past few years. COVID, of course.
Yes.
And still the ongoing crisis, for example, in Gaza, and the protracted crisis, wars around the world. And then a while ago, I was also mentioning the emerging crisis of climate change. And the different forms of planetary crisis that we are facing, and that will be worsened in the years to come. So maybe you can speak a bit about the different crises, specifically in the Asian context. What do you think is happening? And in terms of our responses to the crisis, do you think we're ready? Do you think we're doing a good job? What's the situation in our region?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question. I think when it comes to leadership, I think, one of the things that you might want to look at is how we respond to the challenges. I think the way that I look at it, whether your community is responding to any given challenge, whether you're doing a good job or not, you can look at it from this way. One is that people don't see the challenge, or they might intentionally not want to see that is a challenge. In a way, it's a denial. So therefore they end up doing nothing. Or they just don't see it. Okay, and or maybe they don't really care about that, and so therefore they do nothing. So doing nothing is one. Another thing is that they see it, but they still do nothing about that, right? Or you see that there's a challenge, but you put up a wrong response, right? It's an ineffective response. Or maybe you see a challenge, but you may end up putting up a delayed response, right? And these will eventually lead you to either, again, state of mediocrity or state of decline. I think we've got many challenges. I mean, I want to get involved in many different systemic challenges. So-called the systemic challenges are the macro level challenges that we see. I think climate change is one thing. I mean, I go to Korea, once a month, and what I hear is that the apples that we grow, right? I have some friends who are, have a smart farming, and what they said was that we used to grow apples in the south because we had relatively a cool weather. Now these people have to grow apples close to the border, right? The DMZ line, right? And they say that maybe in about 5 years' time, our apples will grow smaller, and we may not be able to have the quality apples that we used to grow. Now, there isn't, I also heard that there are even people who are growing kiwis and bananas, in down South Korea, right? I mean, the climate change, the change in the species, the ecosystem, we witness that, the heat wave that we see. One of the work I've been doing was in South Thailand. South Thailand, there are a lot of farmers, but because of the heat, these people are not able to grow rice, and the volume has decreased, and so therefore that brings about you know dissatisfaction and possibility of a social unrest, right? So a lot of these things are happening because of the climate change, and the Arab Spring that we witnessed maybe about, I don't know, 10 years ago, was not because of the other reasons, but because it was that they were not able to import grains from Russia and Ukraine, and that has led to, again, dissatisfaction because the prices are going up, the rising cost of living, and that has led to an uprising, right? Seeing that, the government is not doing anything for us. And so all these challenges are interconnected. So it is really important that we, it can't be just the government that deals with these things. I think the government really needs to spend a lot of time and energy into raising awareness and really, through education. I think what education is one thing, campaign is the other. Trying to really raise social awareness to engage the public, to engage in a change of behavior, perhaps, or change of habits, right? When you talk about leadership, one of the things I deal with a lot is the resistance to change, and resistant change. Why are people not resistant? I mean, why are people not so receptive to change? And that's possibly, I mean, there are many reasons for that, right? We really need to kind of go dig deep and try to understand what is really the deeper causes of that. But I feel that a lot of the things that the government does today are very technical in nature. It's very technical in nature. It doesn't really kind of try to understand what is really behind people's, fears or anxiety that comes about with the change, right? The climate change will definitely, bring an impact. For example, like the Thai farmers in the South, but they're not really helping these people to be re-educated, to have an understanding of what the impact and the consequences of the climate change is, and possibly helping them, through education to help them maybe adapt to the changing context. None of these things are happening. So while the macro level, the climate change and all these things are happening, the capacity of governance is the whole another issue. The capacity of the governance is really about how do you govern, right? In other words, I think the role of the government should be raising awareness, educating them, and helping their constituencies to adapt to the changing circumstances. But if you look at many governments around the world, it's very divided. It's really about protecting their own interest, pleasing their own supporters, and really spending a lot of time, fighting and doing, politicking and all these things. And that is one of another existential, threat that we face today. I'm saying that because I work with governments, and I feel that many of the government leaders, the political leaders, are not really thinking about these things, and I'm not sure if really they have the capacity to think about the policies, the impact, and the consequences. Often, a lot of times, I witnessed this also in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia. The political leaders, I feel that they are not so capable and competent to deal with a lot of these challenges, for example, related to climate change. I mean, we can go on, but I think, as times are changing, I think the role of the government is extremely critical. Extremely critical. One figure I can give you is that maybe this might have changed, but the daily expenditure of the U.S. government is almost equal to the whole revenue of Microsoft, right? Is the biggest institution, the government. And it is really important that when there's so many uncertainties, the capacity of the government is ever so critical, and that's where we really need some very good leaders who can help people to adapt to the changing circumstances. But again, the right response to any given challenge is going to be important, and that requires the awareness and also the action that can help people to cope or adapt, to the changes.
Right.
Mhm.
Wow, that's a lot to process, right? But a few main points. One, you're mentioning the limited number of people with competence in our governments, in our decision making arenas. I think many of those competent people stay in academia and in medical centers such as SingHealth. So maybe there's a slight encouragement there for us from academia to really engage with, let's say, the political discourse, to be, active in policy shaping, in bringing our ideas, the knowledge that we generate in the university to the real world, or to influence the real world. And then second, when you were mentioning about resistance to change, but also the politicking in politics. This morning I was just watching the videos from the US, right? Because right now, and I'm not sure who's paying attention to US politics. The Democratic convention is happening. Now the Democratic Party is energized with Kamala Harris replacing President Biden as the candidate. And they're saying, I even saw one phrase. Now we have a prosecutor for the planet, right? So because Kamala hopefully will push forward policies in the US that will, for example, address climate change, fix the planet. And while they are domestic policies, we know US policies are global policies, right? They have a huge ripple effect on the rest of the world. And that speaks to what you were saying, the interconnectedness, right?
Yes.
And nowadays we cannot anymore just think or look parochial and domestic. We really need to recognize we are in a truly global world.
Yes.
COVID-19 showed that to us during the past few years. I want to switch gears a bit, and you've been mentioning the word adapt, right? And I know you've been an advocate, an ardent advocate of this concept, adaptive leadership, which Harvard professor Ron Heifetz from the Kennedy School introduced, developed, has been teaching for decades. Maybe for our first time listeners and hearers of that phrase, briefly define it to us and reflect on its relevance for today. In a way, you've been touching on that already. And then if you notice, the title of our conversation is Transformative Leadership. So maybe you can contemplate also on the connection, but also maybe there's a difference between adapting versus transform.
Yes. So I am a big fan of this concept of adaptive leadership. And adaptive leadership is, simply put, how do we need to adapt, right? How do we need to adapt? Now, if you want to adapt, you need to know the context. How are the contexts changing? So what I do is that there are a lot of warning signs now. Okay, there are a lot of warning signs that tells you that you need to change. Do we know that? Do we spot that? Are we talking about that? What are those? So it is very important to really understand what are these warning signs that we need to know. It can be on a personal level, it can be in a community level, it can be organizational level, it can be a country level. I think if talking about leadership is about what are the things that you need to fix. It's really asking the question, what is going on and what is not right, within the organization, within myself, within the country level. What is not right that requires my attention, my intervention, and eventually, you need to get that right. You need to fix that. So in a way, leadership is a difficult thing because a lot of people do not really enjoy doing difficult things. Talking about what's not right, what requires a fix. Not that many people really enjoy talking about that. People are celebrating. We are doing great. Maybe the numbers are showing you great, but if you look inside, there are things that you need to pay attention to, and you need to fix that. Nokia back in the days, about 15, 18 years ago, was one of my clients. And you might have noticed that Nokia was the first company to develop a touchscreen. They were the first companies to put in camera. They were the first companies to put in, a game into the device called the Snake, and also the spreadsheet. Very innovative company. They used to have a market share, I think it was about 50.3 or 50.7% worldwide, and it took them about 18 months to go down to 3%. And there's a reason why. Again, I'm always saying this. There's always a reason why things happen, right? So one of the things is that while things are looking good, are there any people that are able to tell you that what? I know that maybe on the surface, maybe outside, things are looking great, but look, let's really pay attention and see what requires a fix, what requires a repair. And the fact that you're able to talk about it, and then you have a culture within the organization that is able to listen, hear, and to pay attention to it, we'll be able to survive, right? Ultimately, we want to thrive, but immediately we want to survive. And if you have a culture, or if you have a certain mindset within yourself that says that, yeah, I'm doing well, but still, what are the things that I can still improve? If you are able to do that, pay attention and see, take action upon it, then I think you are able to cope well, right? You're able to adapt well to any given circumstances. So for doing that, I think honesty is going to be very important. The candor is going to be important. You have to be really honest about how you look at the current situation. Right? Again, you may be blinded to look at only the things that you want to see, or you may be more honest and candid enough to look at, okay, things are looking good, but are there any things that we really need to pay attention now before this becomes a bigger elephant in the room, right? So that is a courage, and the fact that you're able to talk about that, expose that, and to bring people's attention to that will be very important, a very important aspect of leadership. So I call this reality check. How candid you're able to engage in a reality check will only then give you some ideas about then what do you need to do next, right? So on one hand, if you really want to see a better future, where you have to begin is always try to understand where I am now, what I am now, because what I'm now today is an outcome of what we have been doing all this while leading to today, right? So you have to really have one eye towards the past, right? That's called hindsight. You're trying to get an insight by looking at the warning signs. Maybe, for example, on a personal level, maybe you are not having a good health. Maybe you're having some health issues. That's a warning sign. And you're having those the health issues because maybe there have been some habits, the things that you've been doing, the things that you've been eating, or the way that you've been managing relationship, for example. I'm just coming with all kinds of, possibilities that might have led to that consequence, right? So you need to look at the past and depending on, again, how candidate you are looking at the past, yes, there are something that you can carry forward, but there's definitely some things that you need to let go, right? Or looking at your past, maybe to have a better health, maybe you need to do something, start something new that you have not done before. So it will be very important to look at the past. Now, another thing is that as we were talking about, planetary health, one of the things is that you need to have one eye looking at towards the future. There are a lot of, again, signals, warning signs that tell you that, there's a possibility that that's how the future might look. I call that thinking like a futurist. It's a futurist thinking. And that's a course I teach. It's really about how do you understand the future? How do you capture? What are the signals there, right? And what are the important drivers, the trends that you need to be mindful of? And how that will, how do we anticipate that future? There are different possibilities, but given different levels of signals, you can get some insights as to how you can prepare in advance, right? That's called the foresight. So it always begins with now getting an insight of, yeah, let's do a reality check. Okay, myself, my organization, my country. And okay, if there's something that's not right, okay, first of all, look towards the past. Are there things that you need to continue carrying forward? Are there things that you need to let go? Are there things that tells you that you need to start doing that will help you to have a more, better, right? Better, again, as I mentioned to you, a better state, a growing state, right? As opposed to mediocre and, declining state. And you also need to look at the future to understand, okay, what are the important signals that we need that tells you that these are the skills, these are the competencies, these are the capabilities that you need to anticipate, and therefore you prepare yourself in advance will keep us in the state of, I don't know, that's one way, my way of understanding how exercising adaptive leadership could be. So again, I think the important part is the courage, the honesty, and the fact that you're able to really have a, we can use the word diagnosis, diagnosis, just like how doctor needs to diagnose a patient before the doctor prescribes the medicine. You need to really diagnose the current situation. You have to really listen to, the voices, the important signals. Otherwise, you won't really have an idea of what needs to be done in order to adapt yourself to the changing circumstances. Right. That's how I can put that into a short version of the adaptive leadership.
Yep. And since you're borrowing a term from the medical sciences diagnosis, when you were saying early warnings or the signals, for us, those are the signs and symptoms, right?
Symptoms
of a particular disease condition, right? So there are many parallels, right, between how we, try to fix medical problems, but also fixing social or planetary problems.
There's a parallel there.
There is a parallel, but also I think there are, major differences. Well, one parallel is when you said the importance of hindsight, and we do history taking when we see the patient, when we assess the patient. But more broadly, I think what you're highlighting to us, unfortunately, we tend to become to demonstrate amnesia when it comes to the past, right? And then we tend to repeat the same mistakes, right? And we've seen that over and over again in our politics, in our responses to crisis, etc. But I think what's new, and this is where the planetary health thinking is also coming from, is looking to the future, right? And I always say in planetary health, we're concerned not just about the health of people living today, but also the health of people living a century from now. People who we will never meet, right? The children of tomorrow that we will never meet. So thinking long term, and in a way which is in relation to your critique a while ago, the short-termism, right? That is creeping among our, let's say, political leaders, right? They're thinking along short-term electoral cycles as opposed to, leaving behind a healthy planet for their grandchildren. So I think that's where adaptive and transformative leadership will also come in. I just want to encourage everybody to start thinking of their questions or comments or reflections, both colleagues who are in the room, but also online. Samuel was encouraging us to be honest, to be open, to be proactive. So in a short while, I'll open the floor for your questions and contributions. But maybe while you're preparing, because you somehow gave to us the ingredients, right? And you also presented at the start a diagnosis of the crisis, the quality of our governments and governance. But are you seeing some shining examples, bright stars, emerging, I don't know, leaders, institutions, enterprises that we should be looking at, emulating, who has the potential to contribute to the advancement of human and planetary health?
Yeah, I mean, that's, looking at the brighter side of things. Well, I personally want to say that it's really difficult to see who the good leaders are, right? Um, I mean, I think only the history can tell you whether you're a good leader or not. Um, Exercising leadership is an ongoing thing. And as we are dealing with a big systemic challenge, you really, I think on one hand, I think leaders needs to survive on one hand. Either that, leaders are burnt out, um, or leaders are taken down by the people because of the expectations that these leaders were not able to meet. Whatever that's out there. I mean, um, it's really difficult for me to say one leader, but I just want to share this one aspect of leadership. I think all of us have so many priorities. And how these priorities are determined are the kind of values and beliefs that you have. Family is important, your health is important, your career is important. You've got so many different things that are very important to you. But we are also faced with constraints, right? I mean, we've got limited time, energy, money, but we want to pursue so many different things. But these priorities come with cost, so-called expectations. It comes with expectations. Um, if you have a family, then you want to spend time with your family. They expect you to spend time with your family, right? If you want to, do well career-wise, you have your own expectation that, my definition of a successful career is this, and so therefore you strive to meet your expectation, your priority as part of the priority. I think good leaders are those who are able to prioritize well. On one hand, one priority is you, right? So it's important that we need to really think about, I mean, as part of your many priorities, you have to be, possibly number one, right? Your health, your well-being. Because without your well-being and health, which is part of the planetary health, without your well-being, mental well-being and a physical well-being, you are not able to pursue all the other priorities in life. Whatever the passion that you have, whatever, all the things that you want to pursue. So if you want to make a sound judgment, if you really want to, build really a personal and career a successful journey, you have to be in a good state, right? You really have to take care of yourself. I've seen many leaders who've got all the competencies, the capabilities, but because of their failure to take care of themselves, either they have made wrong decisions for themselves and they have lost all the reputations that they have built, or they have done something that has brought about a big negative impact on their communities. And when I have interviewed with them, when I have learned about them, it's really they were taking care of other things all but themselves, right? So I'd probably consider a leader is a good leader if you give yourself a good space to take care of yourself. So I would probably ask you this. If you are too busy, I would say that's not a good thing. In fact, that's a warning sign. It's a symptom. It's a problematic symptom that we need to watch if you're too busy. Why? Because that means that we're not giving enough space for ourselves to think about ourselves. Because, diagnosis require you to think a lot. To check and to really understand this requires time, right? And even for yourself, if you really want to do a self-diagnosis about where you are and how you want to, better your career, your personal life, I think you really need to give some space for yourself to think deep enough to know whether your decisions are right, what kind of consequences the impact this decision of yours will bring. And so I think, the leaders are great if they really have time for themselves for self-reflections. And that's how you go long run. You can go for short stints, but at the expense of what? At the expense of your personal, something personal, individual. So That's sort of like my angle, right? Of, yeah, I think the personal health, the mental health, the physical health is extremely, extremely important if you really want to be a leader who does bring good impact, who's able to respond on time, who's able to bring, the organization to respond well. Mobilizing people, working with people, that's very energy draining. That's where a lot of challenges come. Dealing with people is very tough. But if you're physically tired, if you're mentally tired, that level of tolerance diminishes, right? So it's really important that you expand that muscle of tolerance of dealing people with, diverse, different perspective, different agenda, different priorities, different pace, and again, we are moving things together, right? Country as a whole. It's very difficult to move a country. It's very difficult to move a organization. And even your family too. Yeah. It can be difficult. And even for yourself. Maybe your brain says that this is important, but here it's a completely different frequency that you're in. How do you manage that gap? How do you really manage the tension? It requires sound judgment, commitment, willingness. If you don't have a sound physical and mental capacity to do it, then it's going to make it very difficult for you. And that will impact your relationship with other people too. I think, having said on the relationship, I think one area that everyone in the world really needs to invest in is relationship. Knowing how to build relationship, managing relationship. It's not whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. That's a very important skill that we need to hone and we need to develop and practice. For that, you need, a space for yourself. I think that's really important.
Thank you very much for those important reminders and usually under emphasized aspects, right, of leadership development. You can't fix the planet if you're not personally ready, prepared, have that space. And reminded us about self-care and our physical and mental health. We have a few minutes, around 10 minutes for questions, reflections, comments. I'll ask first if there's anyone in the room who would like to start the ball rolling. And then, okay, please briefly introduce yourself and then your question or comment.
I'm Christina. I'm a PhD student at Duke-NUS, integrated biology and medicine. So I'm curious as to your opinions on how to encourage leaders to be courageous when being courageous is very difficult. So in the case of climate change, you're a business leader, you're CEO of this huge company, working towards climate change, it means incredible sacrifices.
Yeah.
If you electrify all the business cars, it's going to be huge costs. It's huge costs to your own personal self. It might be reductions in business profits and things like that. So I'm kind of curious as to your take as to how do you encourage people to kind of make some personal sacrifices for long-term benefit.
Yeah, I think it will require sacrifices. I see it this way. You have to understand, again, start with diagnosis, really understand the nature of the challenge. There are challenges that people are able to accept within a short period of time. The changes in the behavior. If the government tells you that, from today, you may not be able to use plastic bottles, for example, and tell them that, beginning from 1 week from now, we're going to penalize you, we're going to, disincentivize you or incentivize you. Maybe, I don't know, the level of acceptance may be different among people. So you have to kind of understand what is the level of tolerance again. And again, you got to do some surveys, you got to talk to people, you got to raise, people's awareness. And I think a leader needs to understand that first before how quickly or slowly you can roll that out. We call that the ripening of time. The timing is very important. And also the pacing is important. If you are a leader that wants to drive changes without a passion that, this is so important that we need to do this, but the people are not ready for that, then this leader, people will end up blaming this leader, even though I know your intention is good, but look, you're trying to harm us. You're trying to, so this leader may be called as an incompetent leader and maybe unpopular leader. And maybe next time the leader is out. But your intention was great. But despite the intention, I think one thing that you have to think about this is that leader needs to know what is the right thing to do. But more importantly, the leader needs to know how to do that right thing in a right way. So even though you have the right agenda, if the pacing is not right, if the timing is not right, then this leader will likely to fail. So for me, I do consulting work, and I have my own frustrations. This is so important. I try to push the agenda, but there's a lot of resistance. And the moment that you call these people who are resisting change, you are resistant, a change resistors. The moment that I frame them as that, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, you're already, it's us versus them. That's it. Whatever that you're doing, whatever the good intention, I don't see that as a good intention. They don't trust you, me, then any good intention, any good agenda, you will be very difficult to push this. So I think the pacing is important, the timing is important. To do that, you have to really know this. And you can only bring change at the level of the tolerance. You cannot heat it up so high. Otherwise, people will start saying, you know what, you're not here for us. You're trying to, I don't know, push your own agenda. They will try to blame you and they'll try to name call you. And that's, I recently published a book, and I have a section on distraction, where people needs to adapt to a new behavior, but because the pace at which you want to drive that is so disruptive and people are not able to tolerate it, then people start to look for what? Excuses. And one of the excuses is what? Scapegoating or deauthorizing leaders. Trying to tell leaders that, you know what, you're not really for us. That's a distraction. In fact, you need to adapt. You need to change your behaviors. But the pace at which, again, you bring it is too disruptive. It's really difficult for us. So then you need to know why people are resistant. You need to know why. And then you need to really go behind what's really causing that. For example, I've done work. I can, I'll say which name, before COVID. One of my portfolio was corruption, anti-corruption. That was one of the biggest challenges I had faced because why? Bottom line, leaders are afraid of, if I embrace this, the amount of money that's going to be ending up in my pocket is going to be smaller. Yeah. And that's the fear. A lot of people resist it because either that they don't know about what I do. Maybe it's not the right timing. I need to spend more time talking about the change I want to bring. And that's going to require some time. So yes, we need courage, but we need to also think about how do we do this in a right way so that people are able to. So again, that depends on the context, isn't it? Some communities are ready to accept. Some countries will take 5 years to accept, right? But if you want to bring the change, yes, you need to keep on pushing it, but push it at the level that people are able to digest is important. So yes, we need courage, and we need people to talk about that. So yeah, when I work with different companies, I say, hey, what do you think is the level of tolerance? And depending on that, push it hard or push it slow, okay? Or gain more allies, more mobilize people, and then when it feels the right time, then yes, push it, right? So I spend about 70% of time really diagnosing the context before we go in with any interventions, right? The time has to ripen first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, the answer was too long.
So I have 2 questions from Zoom, but please signal to me if there's 1 or 2 more people who would like to speak in this room.
To ask something just quickly. That's been fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you. But how does one overcome the obstacle at a personal level of just feeling ineffectual? These things, these issues are just so huge. You're different position because you've got an ear to the government. If you're not in that sort of situation, you're not operating a big business, you don't have an ear to the government. how do we, how does an ordinary person attack these issues? Even, and you feel them, you want to do something,
Yeah.
but they're so massive.
Yeah.
How do you tackle?
Yeah, it is massive. I think I can say two things. One is you need to manage your own expectations. So in other words, I'm trying to be very
Well, I'm
practical.
not going to be president.
Okay. So expectation means that, you know what? Yeah, I just can I cannot wait to see these changes happen. And if you set the expectation too high, the bar too high, and if you don't really see that changes happening, then you're going to face a lot of frustrations. And this will cause you to end up giving up, or you're going to end up blaming people that, you know what, why is the world like this? So I think managing expectation is going to be, again, the pacing is going to be very important. Right? Be realistic. Another one is you need to look for allies, the like-minded people that you can partner with, whether it be in the academia, whether it be in the company, corporate level, whether it be the government. I think looking for the like-minded people, and I think LinkedIn is a perfect platform for this. And I also go to some events, and I really, do take time to build relationship with people. Try to understand, hey, for example, like I run a conference every May in Korea, and about 350 speakers come to this conference. About 3,000 people attend. It's really important for me to know these speakers and the people that's coming. And I'm really eager to go out and tell them about myself, but also get to know them, right? Because as you do this thing, you don't know who the like-minded people are. So whether it be in a virtual space, whether it be in the physical space, I think you need to look for allies. That's one thing. And then I think we got to maybe number three is really keep on learning, possibly, and to really see what are the major trends, leading to certain things and what are the possible consequences and the impacts. And again, do share that, and maybe, I don't know, some people, I use a YouTube platform, I don't know, maybe those are sort of the grassroots level that we can do. Or maybe even, I don't know, periodically coming up with some publications, very easy read publications, shorts, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, to trying to raise awareness of certain issues. And that's how you can mobilize, how you can gain some momentum. I mean, that's one possible way I think, is important.
Great. We have two questions in Zoom, and maybe we'll end this session with these two questions. And the first one, actually, in a way, it's related, but maybe you have additional thoughts. It's from Norma Tagaza, who's a friend of mine based in Germany. So she's joining us from Germany. In fact, she's teaching leadership at the Heidelberg Institute of Global Health. She has a preambulatory comment here about healthcare's carbon footprint, and we need to encourage hospital leaders to to implement actions that, for example, try to decarbonize the healthcare system without fear of, for example, it will impact costs or endangering patient safety. How can we make leaders be more aware of their responsibility to promote planetary health? And then from Angeline Te, how can leaders develop their emotional intelligence to enhance adaptability? So I think two questions. One is on more awareness and understanding. And maybe you can, think of corporate leaders or what's happening in the corporate or, among governments in terms of the increase in level of awareness around these issues. But on the other hand, one is about the brain, the other is about the heart, right? How do we develop emotional intelligence, in a way also linked to courage?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for joining us from Germany. I think, one of the work that I do is related to ESG, and ESG, you can look at it from three angles. One, how do you minimize the damage that you're doing to the planet is one. So if you're already in business or industry that, cause harm, how do you minimize that? Or if you're in an industry that's doing a bit of damage, how can you make it zero? Okay, that's another angle. And then the third, eventually we should all get there, is that how do we create a positive impact, to the planet? That's another angle that we take when it comes to ESG. I think a lot of the companies are doing that. There are a lot of European companies who are doing it. There are many different companies around the world that are trying to do it. I think it's important that the government, through policies, needs to make it as part of the requirement to report, what they're doing to minimize harm on the planet. But more so, I feel that, again, this is where the government and maybe the grassroots can come into play, is really raising awareness and trying to help people embrace the habit. How do we reduce, or how do we reuse, or how do we recycle, right? It's an important behavior that we need to take. It's a habit that we need to take. I think in that regard, for example, Korea I think it's a relatively an okay example, because Korea, as you know, we're part of WHO. So sometimes some of the food that we take, we cannot cultivate that because it's part of it. Selling cars and electronics, we have to import food, right? So we are dependent on 100% on energy, from overseas. Food, we are also dependent. We're not a self-sufficient economy. So zero net waste food is very important. And I think it's where the technology can come into play, right? I've seen government buildings and the companies, they use a device that tracks your consumption patterns. And then when you go, want to eat, they actually recommend how much you should consume for that meal. Maybe if you want a little bit more, you can go and consume more, but they will give you a recommendation of how much you can consume, so that ultimately we are able to achieve zero net food waste. And the food waste is causing carbon dioxide, carbon emission, isn't it, right? So that's one of the ways in which you can do that. Plastics that you use, anything that you use, are all, again, what are the ways in which we could reduce that, reuse that and recycle that? This is a problem that affects everyone, right? It doesn't just affect the government, it affects all of us, right? So we are part of the problem, so therefore we need to take part in solving that problem. And so one of the ways in which we could respond to that is, again, reduce and maybe reuse it and recycle it. That can be one of the things that we could do on a citizen level. And again, the government needs to know what the priorities of the times, rather than getting into politics, doing politics, knowing what the priorities for helping us to adapt to the ever-changing context. Individually, we need to take up these habits. Companies needs to do their part. And so I consider, government needs to really prioritize this. Do we have the right policies? Do we have the right strategies? Do we have a midterm to long-term, perspective and understanding of what we need to do? What are the priorities? I think that's where we really need to focus on, and having the right priorities will ultimately help us to adapt to the changes. Yeah. That's the way I see it. On the on the empathy, I think I don't have to say too much about that. I mean, that's everyone, a lot of people know about.
Just be kind to others, right?
Yes, kind to other people. It's really, really important. Be kind to other people. So if you value relationships and building a genuine relationships, I think you are naturally able to practice empathy. I think that's something that I have learned to value and to practice. And empathy will probably require a lot of listening, right? Yesterday I was in Kuching, Malaysia, and we were talking about the different levels of listening. And I call that level 1 listening, level 2 listening. Just try to make it kind of simple enough for people to understand what kind of level of listening, my default response is. But listening is going to be ultimately, how do you listen will define how you are able to, practice empathy, rather than talking all the time, telling people, instructing people. Use of questions, listening. And if you really have the heart, and if you really are interested in that person, I think the way that you carry yourself, the way that you interact with people, that will naturally follow. And so again, if you're too busy, that's not good. I think you need to give yourself some space, but also give some space for developing relationship with people, and that's going to require time and space.
Mm.
And so that's what I can see.
Well, so Samuel, thank you for this opportunity for us
Thank
to
you very much.
listen to you.
Thank you.
But we also learned that we need to listen to ourselves as well.
Yes.
Um,
Listen to your voice.
yes,
Yeah.
and to our health. And you know, some of the takeaways, and it's hard to summarize a very rich conversation such as this one, right?
Just too much.
But very inspiring, very informative, very insightful. I think one, transformative, adaptive leadership really can be applied to the whole spectrum, from the personal to the professional to the political to the planetary.
Yes.
We covered
Yes.
the entire
Absolutely.
spectrum
Yeah.
within an hour. And then number two, yes, there's space for courage, there's space for ambition and big goals, but also we need to be strategic. We need to have emotional intelligence. We
Yes.
need to care for ourselves. So adaptive leadership is not reckless leadership, right? Like just do what you can, and then later on
Yeah.
you're burned out.
Yeah.
You cut ties and affect your relationships, and ultimately you did not achieve your goal. So that's what we don't want, as we try to again address some of our existential and pressing planetary health challenges. Thank you, Samuel, for joining us. Thank you to
Thank
our
you so much
friends
for the
who are in
opportunity.
this room and
Yeah.
online,
Thank you.
and have a good day.